I arrived at my pristine Lake Tahoe vacation home for a weekend getaway, only to find the front door hanging open and complete devastation inside. Broken furniture, stained carpets, empty beer bottles covering every surface holes punched in walls, and my grandmother's antique china shattered across the hardwood floors. The smell of cigarettes and something worse filled the air. My security system had been disabled. As I stood frozen in the doorway, my phone buzzed with a text from my younger brother Jake. "Thanks for letting me use the house last weekend, sis." My hands trembling with disbelief, I immediately called Jake while standing amid the wreckage of what had once been my sanctuary. The phone rang 3 times before his voice came through casual and completely unbothered, as if he had just borrowed a cup of sugar instead of destroying my property. "What's up, Ada? How was your drive up to the lake?" His tone was so nonchalant that for a moment I wondered if I was dreaming this nightmare. "Jake, what did you do to my house?" My voice cracked as I stepped carefully around the broken glass scattered across the entryway. "Everything is destroyed. Everything." He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound made my stomach turn. "Oh, come on, it's not that bad. We just had a few friends over last weekend. You know how parties get sometimes." A few friends over. I looked around at what could only be described as a war zone. My 65-inch television lay face down on the floor with the screen completely spiderwebbed. The white Italian leather couch I had saved for months to buy was now stained with red wine, the expensive fabric torn in several places as if someone had deliberately slashed it with a knife. Cigarette burns dotted my grandmother's oak dining table like ugly brown scars, and the smell of ash hung heavy in the air despite every window being open. "Jake, there are holes punched in the walls. My television is destroyed. There's something that looks like vomit on my bedroom carpet." I walked through each room as I spoke, cataloging the destruction with growing horror. The kitchen sink is filled with broken dishes, and someone appears to have used my master bathroom as their personal toilet when they were too drunk to aim properly. "Stuff happens when you party, Ada. You're being way too dramatic about this. It's just things you know. We can clean it up." Just things. I stopped in front of my destroyed art collection where a painting I had purchased for $8,000 now had a beer bottle thrown straight through the canvas. The jagged hole went right through the center of a piece that had taken the artist months to complete. "This painting alone cost me more than you make in 3 months, Jake. And that's assuming you even have a job right now, which I doubt. Look, accidents happen. You've got insurance, right? And it's not like you can't afford to replace stuff. You make good money at that marketing company." The casualness in his voice sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't remorse or embarrassment. This was entitlement, pure and simple. My 23-year-old brother was talking about my property as if it belonged to him, as if my years of hard work and sacrifice meant nothing. "Jake, how did you even get into my house? I never gave you a key." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, I could hear the smirk in his voice. "Mom and Dad have a spare, remember. They gave it to me last month when they said I could use the place sometimes when you weren't around." My parents had given him access to my house without asking me. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath for a moment. "And Jake, what do you mean by sometimes? Have you been here before?" Another laugh, this one more nervous. "Well, yeah, I mean, it's not like you're using it every weekend. It just sits there empty most of the time. Seemed like a waste, you know?" I sank down onto the one piece of furniture that appeared mostly undamaged, a small wooden stool by the kitchen island, trying to process what he was telling me. "How many times, Jake, how many times have you been in my house without my permission?" "I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 times over the past few months. Look, Ada, you're making this into a way bigger deal than it needs to be. We're family. Family shares things." 5 or 6 times. I thought about all the weekends I had planned to come up here but had been too busy with work deadlines. All the times I had looked forward to my peaceful retreat, never knowing that my sanctuary was being violated in my absence. "And the friends you mentioned, Jake, How many people were here? I don't know, maybe 20 or 25 people. It was just a normal party. Everyone was having a good time. 25 people in my 3-bedroom vacation home that I had decorated carefully and lovingly over the past 2 years since purchasing it. 25 strangers had been drinking, smoking, and destroying everything I had worked so hard to create. As I walked back toward the living room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the coffee table alongside the beer bottles and overflowing ashtrays lay several keys. Not just one or two, but at least 5 identical brass keys. Jake, there are multiple copies of my house key on the coffee table. Please tell me you didn't give out copies of my key to other people. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he cleared his throat. Well, I mean, some of the guys wanted to come back up here on their own sometimes. It seemed easier to just let them have keys so they could let themselves in. You're never here anyway. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. Not only had my brother been using my house without permission, but he had given complete strangers the ability to access my property whenever they wanted. My home security, my privacy, my sense of safety had all been completely compromised. You gave strangers keys to my house. My voice came out as barely a whisper. They're not strangers. They're my friends, and it's not like they're going to steal anything. They just wanted a cool place to hang out sometimes. I looked around at the destruction surrounding me. If this was what happened when Jake was supervising the festivities, I couldn't imagine what had occurred during unsupervised visits. Jake, I need you to get every single key back from every single person you gave them to, and I need it done today. Come on, Ada, don't be like this. Everyone's cool. Nothing bad is going to happen. Nothing bad. I stood up so quickly that the stool nearly toppled over. Jake, everything bad has already happened. My house is destroyed. My property has been violated. Strangers have access to my personal space. How exactly could this get worse? But even as I asked the question, I had the sinking feeling that I was about to find out. After hanging up on Jake when he continued to laugh off my concerns, I immediately called my parents. Surely they would be horrified to learn what their younger son had done with the access they had granted him. Surely they would understand the violation I was experiencing and help me fix the situation. My mother, Patricia, answered on the second ring, her voice warm and cheerful. Ada, honey, how are you? Are you up at the lake house this weekend? Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad about Jake. Are you both available to talk right now? Of course, sweetheart. Let me put you on speaker. Robert, come here. Ada wants to talk to us about Jake. I heard my father's footsteps approaching and his gruff voice saying hello. Taking a deep breath, I launched into an explanation of what I had discovered at the house. I described the broken furniture, the stained carpets, the damaged art, the cigarette burns, and the general destruction that had been left in the wake of Jake's party. The place is uninhabitable, Mom. There's actual human waste in my bedroom. Someone was too intoxicated to find the bathroom and just use my carpet instead. I'm going to have to pay thousands of dollars to get this place professionally cleaned and restored. I expected shock, outrage, or at least concern for what I was going through. Instead, what I got was silence, followed by a heavy sigh from my mother. Oh, Ada, I'm sure it's not as bad as you're making it out to be. Jake is a good boy. He just gets a little carried away sometimes. A little carried away? I could feel my voice rising. Mom, he destroyed my property, and he's been doing it for months without my knowledge or permission. My father's voice cut in stern and dismissive. Now hold on, Ada. Jake is only 23 years old. Boys will be boys at that age. We all made mistakes when we were young. This isn't a mistake, Dad. This is deliberate destruction of my property, and it's not a one-time thing. He's been bringing people here regularly, and he's given out copies of my house key to complete strangers. Well, maybe if you use the house more often, this wouldn't be an issue, my mother said, her tone taking on a defensive edge. That beautiful place just sits empty most weekends. At least Jake is getting some enjoyment out of it. I felt like I had been slapped. Mom, it's my house. I work 60-hour weeks to afford that place. Just because I can't be there every weekend doesn't mean Jake has the right to use it as his personal party venue. You make good money, Ada, my father interjected. You're a successful marketing executive with that big company. You can afford to fix whatever minor damage occurred. Jake doesn't have those kinds of resources. He's still finding his way in life. Minor damage. I looked around at the destruction surrounding me, at the thousands of dollars of ruined furniture and belongings, and wondered if my parents had lost their minds. Dad, this isn't minor damage. And it's not just about the money. Some of these things can't be replaced. Grandmother's china set that she left to me is completely destroyed. Those dishes were over 60 years old and had tremendous sentimental value. Oh, sweetheart. My mother's voice took on that patronizing tone she had used when I was 5 years old and upset about a broken toy. You can buy new dishes. There are lovely china sets available everywhere these days. Some of them are even more beautiful than those old ones. The casual dismissal of my grandmother's memory of the connection I felt to family history through those precious dishes left me speechless for several seconds. They're not just dishes, Mom. They were grandmother's. They were the plates she used when she hosted family dinners for 40 years. They were part of our family history. Ada, you need to think about family loyalty. My father said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that had always made me feel like a chastised child. Jake is your brother. Family comes first, not material possessions. But he violated my trust, Dad. He's been lying to me for months. He's given strangers access to my most private space. You're being vindictive, my mother said, and the accusation hit me like ice water. Jake is still just a young man trying to figure out his place in the world. He needs understanding and support, not his sister threatening him with lawyers or whatever you're planning to do. Lawyers. I hadn't even mentioned lawyers, but apparently my parents were already anticipating that my reaction might involve legal action. Mom, I haven't threatened anyone with lawyers. I just want my property respected and my security restored. Well, what exactly do you expect us to do about it? My father asked. We can't turn back time and undo what happened. I expect you to acknowledge that what Jake did was wrong. I expect you to help me get my house keys back from all the people he gave them to. And I expect you to make sure this never happens again. There was another long silence, and when my mother spoke again, her voice had turned cold. Ada, I think you're overreacting to this situation. Jake made a small mistake, and you're acting like he committed some terrible crime. Maybe you need to examine why you're so obsessed with material things that you can't forgive your own brother for a little accident. Obsessed with material things. Small mistake, little accident. Each phrase felt like a dagger to my heart. This wasn't an accident, Mom, and it wasn't small. Jake has been systematically using my house without permission for months. He's shown complete disrespect for my property and my privacy. Your property? Your privacy, my father repeated mockingly. You know, Ada, when I was your age, family meant something more than individual ownership and personal space. We looked out for each other. We shared what we had. I've been looking out for Jake his entire life, I protested. I helped pay for his car when he turned 18. I've loaned him money dozens of times that he's never paid back. I've given him references for jobs. I've supported him constantly. And now you want to punish him for one small incident, my mother said. That doesn't sound like the generous, loving daughter I raised. The manipulation in her voice was so clear, so practiced, that I realized this wasn't the first time my parents had used guilt and emotional blackmail to protect Jake from the consequences of his actions. How is expecting respect for my property punishment? How is wanting my house key back vindictive? Because you're not thinking about what's best for the family, my father said. You're only thinking about yourself and your things. I was still processing this accusation when my mother delivered the final blow. Ada, you should know that we actually told Jake he could use the house sometimes. We thought you wouldn't mind since you're hardly ever there anyway. We were trying to help both of our children get some benefit from that beautiful place. The betrayal was complete. My parents had given Jake permission to use my house without consulting me. They had made decisions about my property as if they had some ownership stake in it. They had assumed I wouldn't mind because they had decided my life wasn't important enough to warrant exclusive access to my own home. You gave him permission to use my house without asking me. We didn't think you'd be selfish enough to refuse, my mother said, and the word selfish hung in the air like a toxic cloud. It's my house, Mom. I bought it. I pay the mortgage. I pay the insurance. I pay for the utilities and maintenance. How is wanting control over my own property selfish? Because Jake is family, she repeated as if that explained everything. And family takes care of family. As I stood in the ruins of my sanctuary, listening to my parents defend the person who had violated my trust and destroyed my property, I realized that their version of family had nothing to do with mutual respect or consideration. Their version of family meant that I was expected to give endlessly while Jake was excused from any responsibility or accountability. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, but the pattern never changed. Every point I raised was dismissed, minimized, or turned back on me as evidence of my selfishness and lack of family loyalty. By the time I hung up, I felt more alone than I ever had in my entire life. The next morning, I drove back up to the lake house with a notebook camera and measuring tape determined to document every single instance of damage. What I had seen in my initial shock the day before turned out to be just the beginning of a much more extensive pattern of destruction and violation. Starting in the living room, I photographed the broken television, the slashed leather couch, and the cigarette-burned coffee table. But as I looked more carefully, I discovered additional damage that I had missed in my initial horror. The hardwood floors were scratched and gouged, apparently from people dragging furniture around or dropping heavy objects. Several of the expensive area rugs I had purchased from a boutique in San Francisco were not just stained, but actually torn, as if people had been sliding across them or using them for activities they were never designed to withstand. In the kitchen, the situation was even worse than I had initially realized. The refrigerator door hung slightly askew, apparently damaged, when someone had yanked it open too forcefully. The glass shelves inside were cracked, and the vegetable drawer was completely missing. The dishwasher door wouldn't close properly, and when I investigated, I found that the interior racks had been bent and twisted, probably by someone attempting to fit oversized items that didn't belong there. But the most disturbing discovery was the state of my kitchen appliances. The expensive espresso machine I had saved for months to purchase was filled with what appeared to be beer instead of water, and someone had apparently tried to brew coffee with alcohol, leaving the entire machine sticky and reeking. The microwave interior was splattered with food that had been heated to the point of explosion and then left to harden into a cement-like coating. Moving to the bathrooms, I discovered that the master bathroom mirror was not just cracked, but had actually been punched, leaving a spiderweb pattern radiating from a central impact point. The tiles around the bathtub were loose and cracked, suggesting that someone had been rough enough to damage the grout and underlying structure. Most disgustingly, there was evidence that people had been sick in the shower and had made no attempt to clean it up afterward. The hot tub on the deck was a disaster beyond anything I could have imagined. What should have been crystal clear water was now a murky brown soup filled with floating debris, including bottle caps, cigarette butts, food scraps, and things I didn't want to identify too closely. The chemical smell was so strong that I had to cover my nose with my shirt just to get close enough to photograph the damage. As I continued my assessment, I discovered that the deck railing had been partially destroyed. Apparently, when someone had leaned against it too heavily or used it to support weight it wasn't designed to bear. 3 of the wooden balusters were cracked completely through, creating a serious safety hazard that would require immediate professional repair. But the most shocking discovery came when I decided to check areas of the house that seemed undisturbed at first glance. In the guest bedroom closet, I found a small plastic bag containing what were clearly illegal drugs, along with several pieces of paraphernalia that suggested people had been using my home for activities that went far beyond simple partying. I immediately called the local police to report the drugs, not wanting to be liable for possession of controlled substances in my own home. The officer who responded was professional, but also delivered news that made my stomach drop. "Ma'am, we've actually been to this address several times over the past few months," Officer Martinez informed me as he bagged the drug evidence. "We've had noise complaints from neighbors on at least 4 separate occasions. Each time we responded, the individuals claimed they had permission to be here from the owner. I never gave anyone permission except my brother, and I never authorized him to have parties here," I explained. "Well, someone has been telling people that these gatherings were approved by the property owner. The homeowners association has also been calling us. They've issued several warnings about this property due to the disturbances and the number of cars parked in the neighborhood during these events." My heart sank as I realized that my brother's activities had not only damaged my property, but had also created legal and community problems that I would now have to address. The homeowners association warnings could potentially affect my property value and my standing in the community. Officer Martinez continued, "We also had a report about 6 weeks ago of possible underage drinking at this address. When we arrived, several individuals appeared to be under 21, but they scattered before we could check identification properly." Underage drinking. The legal implications of that accusation made my head spin. As the property owner, I could potentially be held liable for any illegal activities that occurred on my premises, even if I hadn't authorized them. After Officer Martinez left, I sat down with my notebook and began calculating the financial impact of what Jake had done. The professional cleaning estimate I had received over the phone was $12,000, and that was just for cleaning, not replacement or repair. The furniture that was damaged beyond repair would cost at least $20,000 to replace, and that was if I bought similar quality pieces and didn't try to match exactly what had been destroyed. The art collection damage was particularly heartbreaking. In addition to the $8,000 painting that had been destroyed, 2 other pieces had been damaged in ways that might be repairable, but would require expensive professional restoration. The total value of the destroyed and damaged artwork exceeded $15,000. But as I sat there adding up numbers, I realized that the financial cost, as staggering as it was, wasn't actually the worst part of what had happened to me. The worst part was the violation of trust, the invasion of my personal space, and the complete disregard for everything I had worked so hard to create. This house had been my refuge, the place I came to decompress from the stresses of my high-pressure job and find peace in the beauty of the mountains and lake. Now every corner held reminders of strangers who had treated my sanctuary like a disposable party venue. Even after everything was cleaned and repaired, I wondered if I would ever feel safe and comfortable here again. As the afternoon wore on and I continued documenting damage, my phone rang regularly with calls from neighbors I had never met, people who wanted to apologize for not calling me directly about the problems they had witnessed over the past months. "We tried to get contact information for you from the homeowners association," explained Mrs. Chen, who lived 2 houses down, "but they said they couldn't give out personal information. We didn't know what else to do except call the police when things got too loud." Each conversation revealed new details about the scope of Jake's unauthorized activities. According to neighbors, there had been parties nearly every weekend for the past 3 months, with cars parked up and down the street and music loud enough to be heard several houses away. On at least 2 occasions, people had been seen urinating in neighbors' yards when the bathrooms in my house were apparently too crowded or too disgusting to use. We actually saw people setting up what looked like a beer pong tournament on your deck about a month ago, Mr. Thompson from across the street told me. There must have been 30 or 40 people over there. We assumed you were having some kind of family reunion or something. 30 or 40 people. Jake had told me the parties included 20 or 25 people, but apparently even that number had been a lie designed to minimize the scope of what he had been doing. By the end of the day, my damage assessment notebook contained 12 pages of detailed descriptions, measurements, and cost estimates. The total financial impact exceeded $45,000, not including the potential legal fees, insurance implications, and property value concerns that might arise from the homeowners association issues and police reports. But the number that haunted me most was the simple count of how many strangers had been in my home without my knowledge or permission. Based on neighbor reports and evidence I had found, it appeared that well over 100 different people had been inside my house during the past few months, using my belongings, sleeping in my beds, and treating my personal space as if it belonged to them. As I drove home that evening, I realized that Jake's casual attitude about his activities was actually the most disturbing aspect of everything that had happened. This wasn't a situation where a young person had made a single poor decision and was now remorseful about the consequences. This was a pattern of deliberate, ongoing exploitation that had been carefully hidden from me while being openly flaunted to neighbors and authorities. The Jake I thought I knew, the little brother I had been protecting and supporting for years, apparently didn't exist. In his place was someone who saw my property as his personal resource, and my success as something he was entitled to access without permission or consequences. And my parents, who should have been appalled by what their son had done, were instead focused on protecting him from accountability, while suggesting that I was the problem for expecting basic respect and consideration. As I pulled into my driveway that night, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family had been revealed to be an illusion, and I was going to have to decide what I was willing to tolerate in the name of maintaining those relationships. The next day, I drove to Jake's apartment to confront him face to face with the evidence of his systematic exploitation of my property. I had printed out photographs of the damaged neighbor statements about the scope of the parties and the police reports about illegal activities. I wanted to see his reaction when presented with undeniable proof of what he had been doing. Jake's apartment was a cramped one-bedroom in a complex that looked like it had been built in the 1970s and hadn't been updated since. When he opened the door, he was wearing yesterday's clothes and looked like he had just woken up despite it being nearly noon. "Ida, what are you doing here? I thought you were supposed to be at work today." "I took the day off, Jake. We need to talk about what's been happening at my house, and we need to get this resolved immediately." He stepped aside reluctantly to let me in, and I immediately noticed that his living space was decorated with items I recognized from my vacation home. A set of expensive wine glasses sat on his kitchen counter, glasses that matched a collection I had purchased for the lake house, but that were now missing from my cabinets. A throw pillow from my couch was on his sofa, and a picture frame that had held a family photo in my living room was now displaying a party photo on his coffee table. Jake, you've taken things from my house," I said, pointing to the obvious evidence surrounding us. He shrugged, completely unbothered by the accusation. "I just borrowed some stuff. I was going to bring it back eventually." "You stole from me, and you've been doing it for months." I opened my notebook and began reading the list of damage and violations I had documented. "Jake, the police have been to my house 4 times because of noise complaints about your parties. The homeowners association has issued multiple warnings that could affect my property value. Neighbors have reported seeing 30 to 40 people at some of these gatherings. You've been running illegal activities out of my home." Instead of shame or remorse, Jake's response was anger and defensiveness. "Look, Ada, maybe if you weren't such a workaholic hermit, you'd actually use that house yourself instead of letting it sit empty all the time. At least I'm getting some enjoyment out of it. Getting enjoyment out of it. I could feel my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Jake, you've caused over $40,000 in damage. You violated my privacy, stolen my belongings, and exposed me to legal liability for your illegal activities. $40,000. He laughed the same dismissive laugh I had heard on the phone, but now I could see the complete lack of concern in his eyes. Come on, Ada, you make that much in like 2 months. This isn't exactly going to bankrupt you. The entitlement in his voice was staggering. Not only was he completely unremorseful about the damage he had caused, but he was actually resentful that I was upset about it. How much money I make is irrelevant, Jake. That house represents years of saving and hard work. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every detail was chosen carefully and purchased with money I earned through long hours and dedication to my career. Yeah, well, maybe you should have thought about sharing some of that success with family instead of hoarding everything for yourself. The accusation hit me like a slap. Sharing with family, Jake, I've been supporting you for years. I helped you buy your car. I've loaned you money that you've never paid back. I've given you references for jobs and connections for opportunities. And now you want to act like I owe you something for being a decent sister, he shot back. Family is supposed to help family, not keep score of every little favor. Every little favor. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had loaned him over the years, the hours I had spent helping him with job applications and interview preparation, the times I had covered his rent when he was between jobs. Jake, I want all of my house keys back from every person you gave them to, and I want my stolen property returned immediately. Your stolen property? He gestured around his apartment. I borrowed some glasses and a pillow. It's not like I cleaned out your whole house. You took things without permission. That's theft. And you've been giving people access to my home without my consent for months. Do you understand that some of the things that happened at my house were illegal, that I could be held legally responsible for activities I never authorized? Nobody forced you to buy such an expensive house, Ada. If you didn't want people using it, maybe you should have bought something smaller and cheaper that you could actually afford to maintain properly. I stared at him in disbelief. Somehow in Jake's mind, my success had become the problem. My ability to afford a nice vacation home had apparently created an obligation to share it with anyone who decided they deserved access. Jake, I need you to give me a list of every person you gave house keys to, and I need you to contact each of them to get the keys back today. I'm not doing that, he said flatly. Those guys are my friends, and they're not going to cause any problems. You're just being paranoid and controlling. They already caused problems. The police found drugs in my house. There's been property damage noise violations and reports of underage drinking. This isn't paranoia, Jake. This is protecting myself from legal liability for your reckless behavior. The drug thing was just a little weed, he said dismissively. It's basically legal now anyway, and nobody was doing anything seriously bad. A little weed. Basically legal. I realized that Jake had no understanding of the legal realities of property ownership or the potential consequences of his actions. Jake's possession of marijuana is still illegal in many jurisdictions, and I could be held responsible for any controlled substances found on my property. Beyond that, you've opened my home to strangers who have caused extensive damage and created ongoing security risks. Security risks. He rolled his eyes. Ada, you sound like some paranoid rich lady who thinks everyone is out to get her. These are normal people who just wanted a fun place to hang out. Normal people don't punch holes in walls, break furniture, and leave human waste on bedroom carpets, I countered. And normal people certainly don't steal house keys to distribute to their friends. I didn't steal anything. Mom and Dad gave me access to the house, which means I had the right to make copies of the key for people I trusted. Mom and Dad don't own my house, Jake. They don't have the legal authority to give you access to my property or to authorize you to distribute keys to other people. Well, maybe you should take that up with them instead of harassing me about it. The shift in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. He was no longer even pretending to be apologetic or concerned about the damage he had caused. Instead, he was treating me like an unreasonable adversary who was interfering with his rightful access to resources he deserved. Jake, beyond the property damage and the legal concerns, what you've done is a fundamental violation of trust. I trusted you with information about my travel schedule, my security systems, and my personal space. You used that trust to exploit me. Exploit you? His voice turned mocking. Ada, I used an empty house that was just sitting there doing nothing. If anyone's being exploited here, it's me. You have this amazing place that you barely use, and instead of sharing it with family, you want to keep it all to yourself like some selfish princess. Selfish princess. The insult revealed everything I needed to know about how Jake really saw me and our relationship. I want all of my property returned, all of my keys retrieved, and all access to my house terminated immediately, I said firmly. If you don't comply with these requests voluntarily, I'll be forced to involve law enforcement and legal action to protect my rights. Go ahead, he said with a defiant shrug. Call the cops. Sue me. See how that looks to the family when you try to destroy your own brother over some damaged furniture. As I left his apartment that afternoon, I realized that the brother I thought I knew had never actually existed. The Jake I had been supporting and protecting for years was actually someone who saw my success as his personal resource and my boundaries as obstacles to be overcome rather than respected. The person standing in that apartment wasn't a young man who had made some poor decisions and felt bad about the consequences. He was someone who felt entitled to take whatever he wanted from me and who resented me for objecting to his exploitation. For the first time since discovering the damage to my house, I felt something other than hurt and betrayal. I felt a cold, clear anger that cut through all the family loyalty and emotional manipulation that had been clouding my judgment. Jake had declared war on my boundaries and my property rights. My parents had chosen to support him in that war rather than respect my legitimate concerns. It was time for me to stop being the family pushover who absorbed every crisis and cleaned up every mess without complaint. It was time to fight back. After my confrontation with Jake made it clear that he had no intention of cooperating or taking responsibility for his actions, I decided to take a more systematic approach to understanding the full scope of what had been happening at my property. I hired a private investigator, Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in property violations and family disputes. I need to know everything, I told Sarah during our initial meeting at her office in Sacramento. I need to understand exactly what's been happening at my house, how long it's been going on, and who's been involved. Sarah was a former police detective in her early 50s, with short gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She listened carefully as I explained the situation, taking detailed notes and asking specific questions about timelines, evidence, and the scope of damage I had discovered. The first thing we need to do is check social media, Sarah explained. Young people document everything these days. If your brother has been throwing regular parties at your house, there's almost certainly evidence of it online. Within 48 hours, Sarah had compiled a digital dossier that made my stomach turn. Jake's social media accounts going back 6 months were filled with photos and videos of parties at my lake house. But what made the evidence even more damning was the way he had been presenting the situation online. Look at this post from 3 months ago, Sarah said, pointing to her laptop screen during our second meeting. He's not just showing pictures of parties at your house, he's actively promoting it as a party venue and charging admission. The post she showed me was a professionally designed graphic advertising epic lake house parties every weekend, with my address clearly listed and a price of $50 per person for admission. The comment section was filled with people asking for directions, confirming attendance, and discussing what to bring. "He's been charging people to attend parties at my house," I asked, barely able to process what I was seeing. It gets worse. Sarah continued scrolling through additional posts. "Look at this one from last month. He's advertising overnight accommodations for an additional $25 per person per night." The evidence was overwhelming and infuriating. Jake hadn't just been using my house for unauthorized parties. He had been operating an illegal commercial business from my property, charging strangers for access to my home and treating it like a short-term rental facility. According to these posts and the engagement levels, I estimate he's been making between $800 and $1,200 per weekend from these events. Sarah explained, "Over the past 4 months, your brother has probably generated close to $15,000 in revenue using your property." $15,000. Jake had been profiting substantially from his exploitation of my house while telling me that I was being unreasonable for objecting to minor damage from a few friends hanging out. But Sarah's investigation revealed problems that went far beyond unauthorized parties and commercial exploitation. When she ran background checks on the names that appeared most frequently in the social media posts and comments, she discovered that several of Jake's regular guests had criminal records, including drug possession, assault, and theft convictions. "Your brother has been advertising your address to people with documented histories of criminal behavior," Sarah informed me grimly. "Some of these individuals have been arrested multiple times for property crimes." The security implications were staggering. Not only had Jake given house keys to strangers, but he had specifically given access to people who had proven track records of illegal behavior and disrespect for other people's property. Sarah's digital investigation also revealed that Jake had been monitoring my work schedule and travel plans through social media and family communications to maximize his use of the property when I wouldn't be around to discover his activities. "He's been commenting on your Facebook posts about work trips and conferences," Sarah showed me. "Every time you mentioned being out of town, he posted party announcements within hours." The systematic nature of his deception was breathtaking. This wasn't a series of spontaneous decisions or youthful mistakes. Jake had been running a calculated operation designed to exploit my property while concealing his activities from me. But the most shocking discovery came when Sarah found rental listings that Jake had posted on multiple websites advertising exclusive lake house experiences for groups of up to 20 people. The listings included professional quality photographs of my property, detailed descriptions of amenities, and glowing fake reviews that made it appear as though he was an experienced hospitality provider. "He's been presenting himself online as the owner of the property," Sarah explained. "These listings claim that he's been hosting guests for over 2 years and that he has extensive experience in vacation rental management." The financial records that Sarah was able to piece together from various sources showed that Jake's income from exploiting my property exceeded $12,000 over the past 4 months. He had been collecting payments through multiple online platforms, accepting cash payments at events, and even offering package deals that combined party access with overnight accommodations. "Your brother has essentially been operating an unlicensed hotel and event venue using your property," Sarah summarized. "He's been collecting substantial revenue while exposing you to liability for commercial activities that violate local zoning laws, insurance requirements, and tax obligations." The legal implications were overwhelming. As a property owner, I could potentially be held responsible for operating an illegal business, violating zoning restrictions, and failing to collect appropriate taxes on commercial activities. The homeowners association violations I had already learned about were just the beginning of potential legal problems that could result from Jake's unauthorized business activities. But perhaps the most disturbing element of Sarah's investigation was the evidence that Jake had been using my personal information and property details to establish credibility for his illegal operation. He's been using your credit rating, your professional reputation, and your property ownership to build trust with potential customers, Sarah explained. Several of the testimonials and reviews mention the owner's professional background and financial stability as reasons for booking the property. As Jake had been trading on my reputation and success to build credibility for his exploitation scheme while simultaneously portraying me to our family as an unreasonable person who was overreacting to minor damage. When Sarah presented me with her preliminary report, it included over 40 pages of documentation showing the scope, duration, and financial impact of Jake's activities. The evidence made it clear that this wasn't a situation that could be resolved through family discussions or informal agreements. Ms. Ada, Sarah said as she handed me the report, what your brother has been doing constitutes multiple serious crimes, including fraud, theft, property conversion, and operating an illegal business. This goes far beyond family disputes or personal conflicts. As I drove home that evening with Sarah's report on the passenger seat, I realized that my naive belief in family loyalty and my willingness to give Jake the benefit of the doubt had allowed him to exploit me far more extensively than I had ever imagined. The brother I had been defending and supporting wasn't a young person making mistakes. He was someone who had been deliberately and systematically stealing from me while building a business model based on violating my trust and exploiting my property. The question now wasn't whether I could repair our relationship or find a way to move forward as a family. The question was whether I was going to allow him to continue destroying my financial security and legal standing, or whether I was finally going to protect myself from someone who had declared war on my boundaries and my rights. Armed with Sarah's comprehensive investigation report, I decided to make one final attempt at reasoning with my parents. Surely, when they saw the documented evidence of Jake's systematic fraud and commercial exploitation, they would understand the seriousness of the situation and stop defending his actions. I arranged to meet them for lunch at a quiet restaurant where we could discuss the situation privately, without interruptions. I brought printed copies of the most damaging evidence, including screenshots of Jake's commercial listings, financial records, showing his revenue from exploiting my property, and background checks on the criminals he had been giving access to my home. My parents arrived looking tense and defensive, as if they were preparing for an attack rather than a family discussion about resolving a serious problem. But Mom, Dad, I need you to look at some evidence that my investigator uncovered about what Jake has really been doing at my house. I began placing the documents on the table between us. You hired an investigator. My mother's voice was sharp with disapproval. Ada, that's incredibly vindictive. How could you spy on your own brother? I hired an investigator because Jake has been lying about the scope and nature of his activities, I replied, opening the folder to reveal the most damning evidence. This isn't about minor party damage, Mom. Jake has been operating an illegal commercial business from my property. I showed them the rental listings, the social media advertisements, and the financial records documenting his revenue. I explained how he had been charging admission to parties offering overnight accommodations and presenting himself as the owner of my property to build credibility with customers. My father glanced at the documents briefly before pushing them away with obvious irritation. I don't need to look at a bunch of papers to know what kind of person my son is, he said dismissively. Jake is a good boy who's just trying to make some money and have some fun with his friends. Dad, he's made over $12,000 exploiting my property without my permission. He's been giving house keys to convicted criminals. He's exposed me to serious legal liability for commercial activities that violate zoning laws and insurance requirements. You know what I see here. My mother interrupted her voice, taking on the cold, judgmental tone that had always made me feel like a disappointing child. I see a daughter who hired strangers to investigate her own family instead of trying to work things out through love and communication. I tried to work things out through communication, I protested. Jake laughed at me when I asked him to return my keys and compensate me for the damage. You and Dad told me I was being selfish and vindictive for expecting basic respect for my property. Because you are being selfish, my father said flatly. You have more money than you know what to do with a beautiful house that sits empty most of the time, and a brother who's struggling to find his place in the world. Instead of helping him succeed, you want to destroy him over some broken furniture. This isn't about broken furniture, Dad. Jake has been committing fraud. He's been presenting himself as the owner of my property to run an illegal business. He's been charging people money to access my home without my knowledge or permission. So what if he made some money? My mother snapped. Jake is 23 years old with no college degree and no family connections to help him get ahead in life. At least he's showing some initiative instead of just sitting around feeling sorry for himself. The casual dismissal of Jake's criminal behavior was stunning, but what followed was even worse. Ada, you need to understand something, my father said, leaning forward with the stern expression he had always used when delivering ultimatums. Jake is our son, and we will not stand by and watch you try to ruin his life because you're obsessed with money and possessions. I'm not obsessed with money and possessions. I'm trying to protect myself from ongoing theft and fraud. You're trying to punish your brother for being resourceful, my mother corrected. And frankly, we're disappointed in the person you've become. The Ada we raised would never have hired investigators to spy on family members or threatened her own brother with legal action. The attack on my character was clearly coordinated and designed to make me feel guilty for protecting myself from exploitation. The Ada you raised has been financially supporting Jake for years, while he's been secretly stealing from me and lying to my face. I replied, maybe the problem isn't that I've changed. Maybe the problem is that I finally discovered what he's really been doing behind my back. What he's been doing is trying to build something for himself, my father said, and instead of being proud of his entrepreneurial spirit, you want to tear him down because you can't stand the thought of anyone else benefiting from your precious property. Entrepreneurial spirit. They were characterizing systematic theft and fraud as business initiative. Dad, entrepreneurial spirit involves building something with your own resources and efforts. What Jake has been doing is stealing my resources and exploiting my property to generate income for himself. Your resource is your property, my mother repeated mockingly. When did you become so obsessed with ownership and control? When we raised you, we taught you the importance of sharing and caring about family. I've been sharing and caring about family for years, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I've loaned Jake thousands of dollars that he's never repaid. I've helped him with job searches, given him references, and supported him through every crisis. But apparently none of that matters because I'm not willing to let him steal from me indefinitely. Nobody is stealing anything, my father said firmly. Jake used a family property for some gatherings with friends. The fact that you're treating this like grand theft shows how distorted your perspective has become. I opened the folder again and pointed to the financial records showing Jake's commercial revenue. Dad, these documents show that Jake has collected over $12,000 charging strangers to use my property. How is that not theft? Because he put effort into organizing those events, my mother said. Jake worked to bring people together and create fun experiences. He deserves compensation for his time and energy. The logic was so twisted that I struggled to formulate a response. Somehow, in my parents' minds, Jake's effort to exploit my property entitled him to keep the profits from his illegal activities. Mom, he used my property without permission to generate revenue for himself. The fact that he worked hard to steal from me effectively doesn't make it less of a theft. Ada, we've heard enough, my father said, his voice taking on the final authoritative tone that had always ended family discussions when I was growing up. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop this vindictive campaign against your brother, you're going to stop threatening him with lawyers and investigators, and you're going to find a way to resolve this situation that doesn't involve trying to destroy his future. And if I don't agree to those terms, my parents exchanged a meaningful look before my mother delivered their ultimatum. What, then you'll be choosing legal battles over family relationships, she said coldly, and you'll have to live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of your life. The threat was clear: comply with their demands to protect Jake from accountability or be cut off from family relationships permanently. What about the consequences of Jake's choices, I asked. What about the consequences of his fraud, his theft, and his systematic exploitation of my property? Yes, Jake is a young man who made some mistakes, my father replied. You're a successful adult who should be mature enough to forgive family members and move forward constructively. As I sat in that restaurant listening to my parents demand that I sacrifice my financial security and legal protections to enable my brother's criminal behavior, I realized that their version of family loyalty was completely one-sided. I was expected to forgive, absorb losses, provide financial support, and accept unlimited exploitation in the name of family harmony. Jake was expected to do nothing except continue taking whatever he wanted while facing no consequences for his actions. I need some time to think about what you've said, I told them, gathering up my evidence and preparing to leave. Don't take too long, my mother warned. The longer you drag this out, the more damage you'll do to relationships that can never be repaired. As I walked to my car, I understood that my parents weren't concerned about fairness, justice, or protecting me from ongoing exploitation. They were concerned about protecting Jake from the consequences of his criminal behavior, even if that meant sacrificing my financial security and legal standing to achieve their goal. The family I had been loyal to for 32 years had made it clear that my role was to provide resources and absorb damage, while Jake's role was to take whatever he wanted without accountability or gratitude. It was time to decide whether I was going to continue playing that role or whether I was finally going to protect myself from people who had declared war on my boundaries and my rights. 2 days after my disastrous lunch with my parents, Sarah called me with news that made my blood run cold. Her deeper investigation had uncovered evidence that my family's deception and exploitation went far beyond what any of us had initially realized. Ada, you need to come to my office immediately. Sarah's voice was urgent in a way I had never heard before. What I've found changes everything about this situation. I drove to Sacramento that afternoon, feeling a mixture of dread and determination. Each revelation about my family's behavior had been worse than the previous one, and I was beginning to steel myself for discoveries that would make reconciliation impossible. Sarah's office was filled with new documents, computer printouts, and legal papers that she had spread across 2 tables. Her expression was grim as she gestured for me to sit down. Ada, I've discovered that your family's exploitation of your property is part of a much larger pattern of financial deception, she began. Your parents have been using your vacation home address for various legal and financial purposes without your knowledge or permission. She handed me a stack of documents that made my hands shake as I read through them. My parents had been listing my Lake Tahoe address on credit applications, loan documents, and even tax filings. They had apparently been using my property as collateral or residence verification for financial transactions that I had never authorized. How is this possible? I asked, staring at documents that showed my father had listed my vacation home as his primary residence on a recent loan application. Property records are public, and your parents have access to enough personal information about you to make themselves appear to be legitimate occupants or co-owners, Sarah explained. They've been exploiting your success and property ownership to improve their own creditworthiness and financial standing. The betrayal was so complete and systematic that I felt physically sick. Not only had my family been allowing Jake to exploit my property, but they had been using it themselves for financial gain while pretending to be concerned about family relationships. There's more. Sarah continued, pointing to another set of documents. Jake has been intercepting your mail at the vacation home address. The Postal Service shows forwarding requests that redirect certain types of mail from your lake house to his apartment. What kind of mail? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Wish insurance documents, property tax notifications, homeowners association communications, and legal notices, Sarah replied. Jake has been monitoring correspondence that could reveal his activities while ensuring that you don't receive information that might alert you to problems with the property. The sophistication of the deception was staggering. Jake hadn't just been using my house for unauthorized parties. He had been actively working to conceal his activities by intercepting official communications that might expose him. Sarah, how long has this been going on? Based on the postal records and document dates, Jake has been intercepting your mail for at least 8 months, possibly longer. Your parents have been using your address for financial purposes for over a year. I thought about all the times I had wondered why I wasn't receiving certain documents or communications about the property. I had assumed it was normal bureaucratic delays or mail delivery issues, never imagining that my own family was systematically stealing my correspondence. But the most serious discovery involves your homeowner's insurance. Sarah continued, her expression growing even more grave. Your insurance company has nearly canceled your policy due to unreported incidents and claims that were filed without your knowledge. She showed me documents revealing that multiple insurance claims had been filed for damage to my property over the past year. Each claim had been submitted by someone identifying themselves as a resident of the property, and the insurance payouts had been deposited into accounts I didn't control. Jake has been filing false insurance claims using your policy, Sarah explained. He's collected over $8,000 in insurance payments for damages that he caused himself, essentially making your insurance company pay for the destruction he was creating through his illegal parties. The insurance fraud was a federal crime with serious potential consequences for me as the policyholder. If the insurance company discovered that I wasn't actually aware of or involved in the claims, they could not only cancel my policy, but potentially pursue criminal charges or civil recovery actions. Sarah, this could destroy my financial standing and my legal reputation, I said, struggling to process the implications. If my insurance company believes I was involved in filing false claims, it could affect my ability to get coverage on any of my properties. It gets worse, she replied, handing me another document. Your local police department has a file on your property that includes multiple incident reports and complaint records. According to their documentation, you've been contacted several times about disturbances at your address. I was never contacted by the police about anything, I protested. Because Jake has been impersonating you, Sarah explained. When police responded to complaints about your property, someone claiming to be the owner assured them that the issues would be resolved. The police have records showing that you promised to address noise violations, parking problems, and other community disturbances. Jake had been impersonating me to law enforcement officers, making promises on my behalf, and representing himself as acting with my authority. The legal implications of police impersonation were serious enough without considering the additional problems that arose from his false promises and misrepresentations. There's one more thing, Sarah said, her voice heavy with reluctance. I found evidence that your parents have been actively helping Jake cover his tracks and maintain his illegal operation. She showed me bank records indicating that my parents had been providing Jake with regular financial support, including payments that appeared to be designed to help him maintain the appearance of legitimacy. They had also been helping him monitor my schedule and travel plans to maximize his unauthorized use of the property. Your parents haven't just been enabling Jake's behavior, Sarah concluded. They've been actively participating in the conspiracy to exploit your property and conceal the illegal activities from you. The word conspiracy hung in the air like a toxic cloud. This wasn't a situation where family members had made poor judgments or failed to understand the seriousness of Jake's actions. This was a coordinated effort to exploit my resources while preventing me from discovering the scope of their deception. Sarah, what are my legal options? You have grounds for criminal charges against all three family members, she replied without hesitation. Jake can be charged with fraud, theft insurance, fraud, mail fraud, and operating an illegal business. Your parents can be charged with fraud, conspiracy, and accessory charges related to Jake's criminal activities. And if I don't pursue criminal charges, then you remain liable for all the legal and financial consequences of their actions, Sarah said bluntly. The insurance fraud alone could expose you to federal criminal liability if investigators conclude that you were involved in filing false claims. The illegal business activities could result in zoning violations, tax penalties, and civil liability for any injuries or damages that occurred during unauthorized events. As I sat in Sarah's office, surrounded by evidence of my family's systematic betrayal and exploitation, I realized that my choice wasn't between maintaining family relationships or pursuing legal justice. My choice was between protecting myself from ongoing criminal liability or allowing my family to continue using me as a shield for their illegal activities. The parents I had loved and respected my entire life had been actively participating in a conspiracy to steal from me while manipulating me into believing that I was the problem for objecting to their exploitation. The brother I had supported and defended for years had been running a sophisticated criminal operation that used my property, my reputation, and my financial resources to generate income for himself while exposing me to serious legal consequences. The family relationships I had been desperately trying to preserve were based on lies, exploitation, and a fundamental lack of respect for my rights and boundaries. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of clarity that cut through all the emotional manipulation and guilt. My family had made their choice when they decided to exploit me systematically, while concealing their activities through deception and fraud. Now it was time for me to make mine. The following week, Sarah's investigation took an even darker turn when she discovered evidence that Jake's exploitation of my property had attracted the attention of federal law enforcement. What had started as unauthorized parties and illegal rental activities had apparently escalated into more serious criminal enterprises that posed genuine risks to my legal standing and personal safety. Ada, we have a problem, Sarah informed me during an emergency meeting at her office. The FBI has been conducting surveillance on your property as part of a larger investigation into drug trafficking and money laundering in the Lake Tahoe region. I felt the blood drain from my face as she explained that several of Jake's regular party guests were subjects of an ongoing federal investigation. The drug paraphernalia I had discovered in my guest bedroom was apparently just the tip of the iceberg. According to my law enforcement contacts, your brother's parties weren't just casual social gatherings, Sarah continued. They were being used as cover for significant drug sales and distribution activities. She showed me surveillance photographs taken by federal agents that showed people I didn't recognize carrying large bags and packages into my house during Jake's events. The photos also documented license plates from vehicles that belonged to individuals with extensive criminal records related to drug trafficking. The DEA believes that your property has been used as a distribution hub for illegal drugs throughout Northern California, Sarah explained grimly. The regular parties provided cover for dealers to meet buyers and conduct transactions without arousing suspicion. The implications were terrifying. As the property owner, I could potentially be charged with operating a drug house, even though I had been completely unaware of the criminal activities. Federal drug laws allowed for property seizure and forfeiture in cases where real estate was used for illegal drug activities, regardless of the owner's knowledge or involvement. Sarah, could I lose my house? I asked, barely able to voice the question. It's possible, she replied honestly. If federal prosecutors decide that your property was integral to drug trafficking operations, they could initiate forfeiture proceedings. Even if you're not charged with a crime personally, you could still lose the property under civil forfeiture laws. But the drug trafficking wasn't the worst discovery. Sarah's deeper investigation had revealed evidence that Jake had been engaged in activities that went far beyond simple drug sales. We found evidence that Jake has been blackmailing some of his party guests. Sarah informed me, showing me printed screenshots from encrypted messaging applications. He's been secretly recording compromising footage during events and then demanding money from participants to prevent the videos from being shared publicly. The blackmail operation was sophisticated and extensive. Jake had installed hidden cameras throughout my house to capture footage of guests in compromising situations, including sexual activities, drug use, and other behavior that people would pay significant amounts to keep private. He's collected over $15,000 in blackmail payments over the past 6 months, Sarah explained. Some of his victims are prominent local business people, elected officials, and professionals who would face serious career consequences if their activities at your property became public. The blackmail scheme created multiple layers of legal liability for me as a property owner. Not only were there potential criminal charges related to operating a blackmail operation from my property, but there were also civil liability concerns if victims decided to sue me for damages related to the illegal surveillance and extortion. Several of Jake's blackmail victims have been making regular payments to prevent exposure, Sarah continued. If any of them discover that the illegal surveillance was conducted at your property without your knowledge, they could potentially hold you responsible for their financial losses and emotional distress. But perhaps the most disturbing element of Jake's criminal activities was the evidence that he had been targeting vulnerable individuals for exploitation. We found evidence that Jake specifically invited people to parties who he thought would be good blackmail targets, Sarah explained. He was researching guests' backgrounds, professional positions, and personal circumstances to identify individuals who would be willing to pay substantial amounts to avoid exposure. The deliberate targeting of victims showed a level of criminal sophistication that went far beyond the youthful poor judgment that my parents had been claiming. Jake wasn't a young person who had gotten carried away with partying. He was a calculating predator who had been using my property as the base for multiple criminal enterprises. Sarah, how many people has Jake been blackmailing? Based on the evidence we found, at least 12 individuals have made payments to Jake over the past 8 months, she replied. The total amount he's collected through blackmail and extortion exceeds $23,000. $23,000. Combined with his illegal rental income, Jake had been generating substantial revenue from his criminal exploitation of my property, while I had been completely unaware of his activities. There's one more thing, Sarah said, her expression growing even more serious. Some of Jake's blackmail victims are beginning to fight back. 2 of them have hired attorneys and are considering going to police about the extortion. What does that mean for me? It means that this situation is about to become very public very quickly, Sarah replied. When Jake's victims start filing criminal complaints and civil lawsuits, your property is going to be identified as the location where illegal surveillance and blackmail operations were conducted. The prospect of public exposure was terrifying. Not only would my professional reputation be damaged by association with criminal activities, but my personal safety could be at risk if Jake's blackmail victims or his criminal associates decided that I was somehow involved in his operations. Sarah, I need to know what my options are for protecting myself legally. At this point, Your best option is to cooperate fully with law enforcement and provide evidence that you were an unwitting victim of Jake's criminal activities, she replied. If you can demonstrate that you had no knowledge of or involvement in his operations, prosecutors are more likely to see you as a victim rather than a co-conspirator. And what about my property? What about the financial losses I've suffered? You'll need to document every instance of damage theft and unauthorized use for potential restitution claims, Sarah explained. But honestly, recovering financial damages from Jake is probably going to be difficult, given that most of his income has come from illegal activities. As I left Sarah's office that afternoon, I realized that my situation had moved far beyond family disputes or property damage issues. I was now potentially facing federal criminal investigation, property forfeiture, civil lawsuits, and public exposure as the unwitting facilitator of drug trafficking and blackmail operations. The brother I had been defending as a young person making mistakes was actually a sophisticated criminal who had been using my property as the headquarters for multiple illegal enterprises. The parents who had been lecturing me about family loyalty had been helping to conceal criminal activities that could destroy my career, my financial security, and my personal safety. The choice I faced was no longer between family harmony and legal action. The choice was between taking immediate action to protect myself from criminal liability or allowing my family's illegal activities to destroy everything I had worked my entire life to build. The time for family meetings and emotional appeals had passed. The time for legal action had arrived. Within days of discovering the full scope of Jake's criminal activities, my family launched an aggressive campaign designed to discredit my character and pressure me into dropping any legal action against them. What followed was a coordinated attack that revealed just how far they were willing to go to protect Jake from the consequences of his criminal behavior. It started with phone calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, each one delivering carefully scripted messages about my alleged greed and vindictiveness. My cousin Michelle called to inform me that Jake had told the entire extended family that I was trying to destroy him financially over some minor property damage. But Ada, everyone is really concerned about how obsessed you've become with money, Michelle said during a call that felt more like an intervention than a conversation. Jake explained that you're threatening to sue him over some broken furniture and party cleanup costs. Don't you think you're taking this too far? The fact that Jake had completely misrepresented the situation to our extended family wasn't surprising, but the coordinated nature of the outreach suggested that my parents were actively orchestrating a campaign to isolate me and pressure me into compliance. Michelle, Jake has been operating illegal businesses from my property and committing federal crimes, including blackmail and drug trafficking facilitation, I explained. This isn't about broken furniture. That sounds a little dramatic, Ada. Jake is just a young guy trying to have some fun with his friends. Maybe you should consider that your perspective might be a little skewed because you spend too much time focused on work and money. The conversation followed the same pattern as all the others' family members who had been given false information about the situation, lecturing me about my character flaws while dismissing my legitimate concerns as evidence of greed or mental instability. But the family pressure campaign escalated significantly when my parents decided to take their manipulation public. They began contacting my professional colleagues and social acquaintances to share their concerns about my vindictive behavior toward family members. I discovered this when my boss, Jennifer, called me into her office for what she described as a welfare check conversation. Ada, I received a very concerning call from someone claiming to be your mother. Jennifer said, her expression serious and worried. She said that you've been under a lot of stress lately and that you're making some unusual decisions regarding family relationships. She asked if we had noticed any changes in your work performance or behavior that might indicate you need professional help. The manipulation was so calculated and vicious that it took my breath away. My parents were calling my workplace to suggest that I was mentally unstable, apparently hoping to damage my professional reputation and credibility. Jennifer, my family is trying to pressure me into dropping legal action against my brother for criminal activities. I explained. They're attempting to manipulate my professional relationships to force me into compliance. Or what kind of criminal activities? Jennifer asked, her concern shifting from my mental health to the substance of the situation. I gave her a brief overview of Jake's drug trafficking facilitation, blackmail operations, and systematic fraud. Jennifer's expression grew increasingly serious as I explained the scope of the criminal behavior and the potential legal liability I was facing as the property owner. Ada, this is exactly the kind of situation where you need to protect yourself legally regardless of family pressure, Jennifer said firmly. If your property has been used for federal crimes, you could face serious professional consequences if you don't handle this properly. But my family's attack on my professional relationships was just the beginning of their escalation. They began creating false social media accounts to spread lies about my character and business practices, posting reviews and comments designed to damage my reputation in professional and personal circles. Sarah discovered the fake social media campaign during her ongoing investigation. They're posting content that suggests you've been involved in fraudulent business practices and that you're known for exploiting family members financially, she informed me. The fake posts were sophisticated and believable, written in a style that suggested they came from former colleagues or business associates who had negative experiences working with me. They were designed to create doubt about my character and credibility among people who might be considering working with me professionally. Your brother has also been contacting people in your professional network directly, Sarah continued. He's been calling them to share his version of your family dispute, portraying himself as a victim of your greed and vindictiveness. The systematic nature of the character assassination campaign was breathtaking. My family wasn't just trying to pressure me privately, they were attempting to destroy my professional and personal reputation to force me into compliance with their demands. But the most disturbing escalation came when Jake began making direct threats about the consequences I would face if I continued pursuing legal action against him. Ada, you need to understand something, Jake said during a phone call that I recorded on Sarah's advice. If you try to destroy me legally, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. I have information about your personal life that you wouldn't want your professional colleagues or social circle to know about. What kind of information? I asked, though I couldn't imagine what leverage he thought he had over me. Let's just say that the surveillance cameras I installed at your house captured more than just party footage, Jake replied with a malicious laugh. I have videos of you during your private visits to the lake house that would be very embarrassing if they became public. The threat of revenge porn and illegal surveillance was the final confirmation that Jake was a dangerous criminal who would use any method available to protect himself from accountability. The fact that he had been secretly recording my private activities in my own home was a violation so complete that it destroyed any remaining possibility of family reconciliation. Jake threatening to distribute illegal surveillance footage is a federal crime, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, despite my horror at what he was revealing. Good luck proving that in court while dealing with the public embarrassment of having your private activities broadcast to everyone you know, he responded. Maybe you should think about that before you decide to destroy your own brother's future. After that conversation, I realized that my family's escalation had moved far beyond manipulation and pressure into the realm of direct criminal threats and intimidation. They were willing to commit additional federal crimes to protect Jake from the consequences of his existing criminal behavior. The parents who had raised me were actively participating in a criminal conspiracy that now included threats of revenge, porn distribution, and systematic harassment designed to force me into submission. The brother I had supported for years was threatening to destroy my reputation and privacy if I didn't allow him to continue exploiting me with impunity. The family I had been desperately trying to preserve through compromise and understanding had declared total war on my legal rights, my professional standing, and my personal safety. There was no longer any question about what I needed to do. The only question was whether I would act quickly enough to protect myself before their criminal behavior destroyed everything I had worked my entire life to build. The time for family loyalty and emotional considerations had passed. The time for decisive legal action had arrived, and I could no longer afford to hesitate out of concern for relationships that my family had already destroyed through their criminal behavior. 3 days after Jake's threatening phone call about illegal surveillance footage, my parents requested an emergency family meeting. They insisted on meeting at their house, claiming they had something urgent to discuss that would resolve this situation once and for all. Against my better judgment and Sarah's advice, I agreed to hear what they had to say. When I arrived at my childhood home that evening, I found my parents waiting in the living room with serious expressions and a folder of documents spread across the coffee table. The atmosphere felt like a business negotiation rather than a family discussion, and I immediately sensed that they had prepared some kind of formal presentation. "Ada, sit down," my father said in the authoritative tone he had always used when delivering important family pronouncements. "Your mother and I have spent considerable time discussing this situation, and we've reached some conclusions that we need to share with you." I took a seat across from them, noticing that they had positioned themselves behind the coffee table like opposing counsel preparing to deliver settlement terms. "First, we want you to understand that we're deeply disappointed in how you've handled this family crisis." My mother began, her voice cold and formal. "Instead of approaching this situation with love, understanding, and a commitment to family unity, you've chosen to hire investigators, threaten legal action, and attempt to destroy your brother's future. The accusation that I was somehow responsible for creating the family crisis was so backwards that I struggled to formulate a response, but my father continued before I could speak. "We've consulted with our attorney, and we've learned some things about your legal position that you apparently don't understand," he said, gesturing to the documents on the table. "You're not as legally protected as you think you are, and pursuing criminal charges against Jake could expose you to serious legal risks." "What kind of legal risks, Maria?" I asked, though I suspected they were bluffing. "Well, for starters, there's the question of whether you actually own that lake house free and clear," my mother said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We helped you with the down payment when you bought that property, remember? Our attorney says we may have grounds to claim partial ownership." I did remember the $5,000 they had given me toward my down payment 3 years ago, money I had always assumed was a gift, but that they had apparently decided to recharacterize as an investment. "Mom, you gave me that money as a gift. You never mentioned any expectation of ownership or repayment." "We have documentation showing that it was a loan, not a gift," my father replied, tapping the folder, "and we've never received any payments or acknowledgement of the debt. Our attorney believes we have grounds to force a sale of the property to recover our investment." The threat was clear: comply with their demands or face a legal battle over property ownership that could force me to sell my lake house regardless of the outcome. "But that's not our preferred solution," my mother continued. "We'd much rather resolve this situation in a way that keeps our family together and protects everyone's interests." "What kind of resolution are you proposing?" I asked, dreading the answer. My father opened the folder and pulled out several documents that had clearly been prepared by an attorney. "We're proposing a family agreement that addresses everyone's concerns while avoiding the destruction that legal action would cause." He handed me a document titled Family Property Sharing Agreement that made my blood pressure spike as I read through the terms. The agreement would formalize Jake's right to use my vacation home for up to 2 weekends per month, with my parents retaining oversight authority to ensure the property was used appropriately. You want me to sign a legal document giving Jake permanent access to my house? I asked in disbelief. We want you to acknowledge that family property should benefit the entire family, not just the person whose name happens to be on the deed, my mother replied. Jake has been trying to build something positive with that property, and instead of supporting his efforts, you've been trying to sabotage him. Mom, Jake has been committing federal crimes using my property. He's been blackmailing people, facilitating drug trafficking, and operating illegal businesses. How is any of that positive? Those are allegations you can't prove, my father said dismissively. And even if some inappropriate activities occurred, Jake is willing to ensure that future use of the property will be completely legitimate and appropriate. The casual dismissal of documented criminal behavior as inappropriate activities showed just how committed my parents were to protecting Jake regardless of the facts. What if I refused to sign this agreement? I asked, though I already knew I had no intention of signing anything that legitimized Jake's exploitation of my property. My parents exchanged a meaningful look before my mother delivered their ultimatum with the cold precision of a business negotiation. Then you'll be choosing legal battles over family relationships, she said, and you'll have to live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of your life. What specific consequences are you talking about? Well, for starters, you'll be permanently excluded from all family events and gatherings, my father explained. No holidays, no birthdays, no weddings, no funerals. You'll be treated as if you're not part of this family anymore. We'll also be changing our wills to ensure that our estate goes to family members who actually care about family loyalty, my mother added. Jake will inherit everything, and you'll receive nothing. The financial threat was significant since my parents had accumulated substantial assets over their lifetimes, but the emotional manipulation was even more devastating. They were threatening to erase me from family history if I didn't comply with their demands. And we'll make sure that everyone in our extended family understands exactly why you've been excluded, my father continued. They'll know that you chose money and legal vengeance over family relationships. We've already started explaining the situation to your cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends, my mother said. Most of them are shocked by your vindictive behavior, and they've expressed support for our decision to protect Jake from your attacks. The systematic campaign to turn the entire extended family against me was already in motion, apparently designed to ensure that I would face complete social isolation if I didn't surrender to their demands. You have 48 hours to decide, my father announced, pulling out another document. Sign this agreement, drop all legal action against Jake, and commit to resolving this situation through family cooperation, or face the consequences of destroying your own family over material possessions. What about the criminal activities? What about the drug trafficking and blackmail operations? Well, those are Jake's problems to resolve, my mother said coldly. Your problem is deciding whether you're going to be a loyal family member or a vindictive stranger who used to share our name. The finality in her voice made it clear that this wasn't a negotiation. It was an ultimatum designed to force my complete capitulation to their demands through a combination of legal threats, financial manipulation, and emotional blackmail. I need time to think about what you're asking, I said, standing up to leave. Don't take too long, my father warned. Every day you delay makes it harder to repair the damage you've already done to our family relationships. As I drove home that night, I realized that my parents' ultimatum had actually clarified my situation in ways they hadn't intended. They had made it clear that their version of family loyalty required me to sacrifice my legal rights, my financial security, and my personal safety to protect Jake from accountability for his criminal behavior. They had also revealed that their love and acceptance were conditional on my willingness to accept unlimited exploitation without complaint. The moment I had tried to protect myself from criminal victimization, They had declared me an enemy of the family and begun working to destroy my relationships and reputation. The parents I had loved and respected my entire life were willing to commit legal fraud, engage in systematic harassment, and threaten financial destruction to force me into compliance with their demands. The choice they were offering wasn't between family harmony and legal action. The choice was between accepting permanent victimization or protecting myself from people who had declared war on my boundaries and my rights. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of calm clarity that cut through all the emotional manipulation and guilt. My family had shown me exactly who they really were and what they really valued. Now it was time to show them exactly who I really was and what I was willing to do to protect myself from their criminal behavior. The 48-hour deadline they had given me was more than enough time to finalize the legal strategy that would end their exploitation of me permanently. Instead of spending my 48 hours agonizing over my family's ultimatum, I used the time to implement a comprehensive legal strategy designed to protect myself from ongoing criminal liability while holding each family member accountable for their specific actions. The scared, guilty daughter who had been desperately trying to preserve family relationships was gone, replaced by a determined woman who refused to be victimized any longer. My first call was to James Rodriguez, the criminal defense attorney that Sarah had recommended for cases involving family fraud and property crimes. James specialized in situations where family members exploited each other financially, and he had extensive experience helping victims navigate the complex legal issues that arose from intra-family criminal behavior. Mrs. Ada, James said during our emergency consultation, based on the evidence your investigator has compiled, you're not just dealing with property damage or family disputes. You're dealing with organized criminal activity that has exposed you to serious federal liability. James explained that my best strategy was to take immediate action to establish myself as a victim of my family's criminal conspiracy, rather than allowing law enforcement to potentially view me as a co-conspirator who had been aware of the illegal activities. The longer you wait to report these crimes, the more likely it becomes that prosecutors will question why you didn't act sooner. If you were truly an innocent victim, he explained, we need to get ahead of this situation before it gets ahead of us. Within 24 hours, James had helped me file criminal complaints against Jake for fraud theft, blackmail, illegal surveillance, drug trafficking facilitation, and operating an illegal business. We also filed complaints against my parents for conspiracy fraud and accessory charges related to their participation in concealing and facilitating Jake's criminal activities. But criminal complaints were just the beginning of my legal strategy. James also helped me file civil lawsuits seeking monetary damages for property damage lost, rental income legal fees, and emotional distress. The civil suits included demands for treble damages under racketeering statutes, since my family's coordinated criminal activities met the legal definition of organized crime. Your family's systematic exploitation of your property constitutes a RICO violation, James explained. The Federal Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act allows for enhanced penalties when criminal activities are conducted as a part of an ongoing enterprise. While James handled the criminal and civil litigation, I worked with a different attorney, Maria Santos, to implement comprehensive asset protection strategies. Maria specialized in helping victims of family financial abuse protect their remaining assets from ongoing exploitation and retaliation. Your family has demonstrated that they're willing to use any legal mechanism available to continue exploiting you, Maria explained. We need to create legal barriers that prevent them from accessing your property, your finances, or your personal information. Maria helped me establish a revocable trust that transferred ownership of my vacation home and other significant assets into a legal entity that my family couldn't attack through property claims or fraudulent ownership assertions. The trust included specific provisions preventing any family member from claiming beneficial interest in the assets. We also implemented comprehensive security measures for my financial accounts, credit reports, and personal information. I changed all passwords, implemented two-factor authentication, and placed fraud alerts on all my financial accounts to prevent my family from continuing to use my personal information for fraudulent purposes. But perhaps the most important element of my legal strategy was the comprehensive documentation process that Sarah and I implemented to preserve evidence of my family's criminal activities. We created detailed timelines, financial records, and communication logs that demonstrated the scope and duration of their exploitation. Your family is going to claim that you're exaggerating the situation or that their activities were much less serious than you're alleging, Sarah explained. We need irrefutable evidence that proves the systematic nature of their criminal behavior. Sarah worked with forensic accountants to document the full financial impact of my family's exploitation. The analysis included not just direct property damage and theft, but also lost rental income insurance implications, legal fees, and the cost of implementing security measures to prevent ongoing exploitation. The total financial impact exceeds $87,000, the forensic accountant informed me. That includes $32,000 in direct property damage, $23,000 in stolen rental income, $15,000 in legal and investigative fees, $12,000 in insurance complications, and $5,000 in security upgrades. But the financial analysis also revealed something that hadn't been immediately apparent. My family's exploitation had been so systematic and extensive that they had actually caused more damage to my financial position than just the direct costs of their criminal activities. Your credit rating has been negatively impacted by the insurance claims and legal issues associated with the property, the accountant explained. The Homeowners Association violations and police reports have also created documentation that could affect future property transactions and insurance coverage. The hidden costs of my family's criminal behavior extended far beyond the immediate damage they had caused. Their actions had created ongoing legal and financial complications that would affect my property ownership and financial standing for years to come. Armed with comprehensive legal documentation and a clear strategy, I decided to give my family one final opportunity to resolve the situation voluntarily before implementing the full scope of legal action available to me. I drafted a formal demand letter that outlined exactly what I knew about each family member's criminal activities and exactly what I expected them to do to resolve the situation. The letter included detailed evidence of their crimes, financial calculations of damages, and specific deadlines for compliance with my demands. Jake will have 7 days to return all stolen property, provide a complete list of everyone who has keys to my house, and sign a confession admitting to his criminal activities. I wrote, my parents will have 7 days to provide full financial disclosure of their exploitation of my property, and to sign agreements acknowledging their participation in Jake's criminal conspiracy. The letter also included a clear explanation of the consequences of non-compliance, immediate implementation of criminal prosecution, civil litigation, and public exposure of their criminal activities. If any family member fails to comply with these demands within the specified timeframe, I will proceed with full legal action, including criminal prosecution, civil recovery litigation, and public disclosure of all evidence related to their criminal activities. But the most important element of my demand letter was the section that addressed their attempts to manipulate me through emotional blackmail and family pressure. I want to be absolutely clear that threats of family exclusion, inheritance, changes, or reputation damage will not influence my decisions regarding legal action. I wrote, I will not sacrifice my legal rights, my financial security, or my personal safety to maintain relationships with people who have demonstrated complete disregard for my welfare and boundaries. After sending the demand letter via certified mail to all three family members, I felt a sense of empowerment that I hadn't experienced since discovering the initial damage to my property. For the first time in months, I was taking decisive action to protect myself instead of reacting to their exploitation and manipulation. The scared, guilty daughter who had been desperately trying to preserve family relationships was gone. In her place was a woman who understood her rights, knew her worth, and refused to be victimized by anyone regardless of their biological relationship to her. My family had spent months systematically exploiting me while convincing me that I was the problem for objecting to their criminal behavior. They had used my love for them as a weapon against me, manipulating my desire for family harmony to prevent me from protecting myself from their ongoing crimes. But they had made a critical miscalculation. They had assumed that I would continue accepting unlimited exploitation rather than risk losing relationships with people who had already demonstrated that they didn't actually care about my welfare. The 7-day deadline I had given them was more than generous considering the scope of their criminal behavior. It was also exactly the amount of time I needed to finalize the comprehensive legal strategy that would end their exploitation of me permanently. Whether they chose to comply with my demands or face the full consequences of their criminal actions was entirely up to them. But either way, their ability to victimize me with impunity was about to end forever. On the 7th day after sending my demand letter, when none of my family members had responded with even an acknowledgement that they had received it, I implemented the comprehensive legal action I had been preparing. The first element of my response was a detailed invoice that itemized every cost, loss, and consequence of their criminal activities with the precision of a forensic audit. The package that arrived at each family member's residence via certified mail contained 87 pages of documentation that laid out their criminal behavior and its financial impact with devastating clarity. Each family member received a personalized version that highlighted their specific role in the criminal conspiracy while also documenting the collective damage they had caused. Jake's invoice totaled $63,427, itemizing costs that included property damage, stolen rental income, illegal business profits that belonged to me as the property owner, legal fees, investigative costs, and security upgrades necessitated by his criminal activities. Property destruction and vandalism, $28,600. The invoice began with detailed line items for each piece of damaged furniture, destroyed artwork, and necessary repairs. Stolen rental income from illegal business operations, $23,800, representing income that should have been generated for the legitimate property owner. But the most devastating section of Jake's invoice addressed the criminal activities that went beyond simple property exploitation. Blackmail and extortion operations conducted from property, $15,300 in documented payments received from victims, plus $10,000 in legal fees for defending against potential criminal charges and civil lawsuits from blackmail victims. Jake's invoice also included costs for dealing with the drug trafficking that had been facilitated through his parties, including legal fees for potential federal criminal liability security measures to prevent ongoing criminal activity, and the cost of professional cleaning to remove drug residue and paraphernalia from the property. My parents' invoices were smaller but equally devastating, focusing on their role as co-conspirators and accessory participants in Jake's criminal activities. Financial fraud and identity theft, $8,700. My father's invoice began representing the cost of addressing fraudulent credit applications, loan documents, and tax filings that illegally use the victim's property as collateral or residence verification. Babasim mail theft and communication interference, $3,200. My mother's invoice stated representing the cost of addressing stolen correspondence, missed legal notifications, and the necessity of implementing secure communication systems to prevent ongoing mail theft. But beyond the individual invoices, each family member also received a comprehensive legal analysis that explained their potential criminal liability and the enhanced penalties they face under federal racketeering statutes. The coordinated nature of your criminal activities meets the federal definition of organized crime under RICO statutes, the legal analysis explained. This designation allows for enhanced criminal penalties, expanded civil liability, and potential forfeiture of any assets that were obtained through or used to facilitate criminal activities. The documentation included detailed timelines showing how their criminal conspiracy had developed over time, financial records proving the scope of their illegal profit-taking, and evidence of their coordinated efforts to conceal their activities and retaliate against me for attempting to protect myself. This analysis demonstrates that your criminal activities were not isolated incidents or impulsive mistakes. The legal documentation stated, they represent a systematic pattern of exploitation, deception, and retaliation that constitutes ongoing criminal enterprise activity. But the most powerful element of the documentation was the evidence section that included screenshots, financial records, surveillance footage, and recorded conversations that proved every allegation with irrefutable clarity. The attached evidence demonstrates beyond any reasonable doubt that you have engaged in criminal activities, including fraud theft, blackmail, drug trafficking, facilitation, money laundering, and conspiracy, the evidence summary stated. This evidence has been provided to appropriate law enforcement agencies and will be used in criminal prosecution proceedings. The documentation also included a timeline showing exactly when law enforcement agencies had been notified about each criminal activity, making it clear that criminal investigations were already underway, and that any attempt to destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses would constitute additional federal crimes. Criminal complaints have been filed with the following agencies. The notification section explained listing the FBI, DEA, local police departments, and state attorney general's office as entities that were actively investigating my family's criminal activities. Each family member also received a detailed explanation of their legal options, though those options were extremely limited, given the overwhelming evidence of their criminal behavior. You may choose to cooperate fully with law enforcement investigations and provide complete restitution for all damages in exchange for consideration during criminal sentencing. The options section explained. Alternatively, you may choose to contest these charges and face the full legal consequences of your criminal activities, including federal prosecution, civil liability, and public exposure. But perhaps the most devastating element of the entire package was the section that addressed their attempts to manipulate me through family pressure and emotional blackmail. Any further attempts to threaten, intimidate, harass, or manipulate the victim will be documented as additional criminal activity and will result in enhanced charges and penalties. The warning section stated clearly, this includes threats related to family relationships, inheritance, reputation, damage, or any other form of retaliation. The documentation made it clear that I had anticipated their likely responses and had prepared legal countermeasures for every form of retaliation or manipulation they might attempt. The victim has implemented comprehensive legal protections, including restraining orders, communication monitoring, financial security measures, and professional reputation protection strategies. The protection section explained, any attempt to circumvent these protections will result in additional criminal charges and civil liability. 3 days after the packages were delivered, I began receiving frantic phone calls from all 3 family members, though their responses revealed everything I needed to know about their true character and motivations. Jake's response was pure rage and continued threats, confirming that he had learned nothing from the legal action and remained committed to exploiting me if given any opportunity. "You're going to regret this, Ada," he said during a recorded phone call. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows what a vindictive, money-obsessed person you really are. You're destroying your own family over money." My parents' responses were focused on damage control and attempting to negotiate reduced consequences rather than acknowledging the seriousness of their criminal behavior. "Ada, surely we can work something out that doesn't involve all these lawyers and criminal charges," my mother pleaded during her call. "We're family. Family doesn't destroy each other over business disagreements." Business disagreements. Even when faced with comprehensive evidence of systematic criminal activity, my parents were still attempting to minimize their behavior and avoid accountability. "This isn't a business disagreement, Mom," I replied calmly. "This is criminal prosecution for fraud, theft, and conspiracy. You participated in a criminal enterprise that caused me significant financial damage and exposed me to serious legal liability. We never meant for things to go this far." My father added his voice, showing the first genuine concern I had heard from him since the situation began. "Maybe Jake got a little carried away, but we were just trying to help him succeed." "Dad, you helped him commit fraud, theft, and money laundering. You used my property for illegal financial transactions and helped him conceal criminal activities. Those aren't parenting mistakes. They're federal crimes." The phone calls confirmed that my family remained fundamentally unwilling to acknowledge the seriousness of their criminal behavior or to take genuine responsibility for the damage they had caused. More importantly, the calls demonstrated that they still viewed me as someone who could be manipulated, threatened, or guilt-tripped into abandoning my legal protections in the name of family loyalty. They were about to discover how wrong they were about who I had become and what I was willing to do to protect myself from their ongoing criminal activities. The invoices and criminal complaints were just the beginning of the legal consequences they would face for choosing criminal exploitation over family respect. Along with the comprehensive invoices and criminal complaints, each family member also received a document that would fundamentally change the nature of any future relationship we might have. My new family gathering policy, a legally binding set of rules and restrictions that established clear boundaries for any future contact or interaction. The policy was drafted by my attorney as an enforceable legal document that could be used in court if any family member violated its terms. It was designed to protect me from ongoing manipulation, harassment, and criminal activity while establishing exactly what any future family relationship would require. Effective immediately, all future contact between Ada Rodriguez and any member of her biological family will be governed by the terms and conditions outlined in this family interaction agreement. The document began with the formal language of a business contract. The first section established the fundamental principle that would govern all future family interactions: mutual respect and legal accountability. Any family member seeking to establish or maintain a relationship with Ada Rodriguez must first acknowledge their past criminal behavior in writing, provide full financial restitution for all damages, and agree to ongoing legal and financial accountability for their actions. The policy required each family member to sign a detailed confession acknowledging their specific criminal activities, the financial damage they had caused, and their understanding that any future criminal behavior would result in immediate prosecution and permanent relationship termination. Jake Rodriguez must acknowledge in writing that he engaged in fraud, theft, blackmail, drug trafficking, facilitation, and conspiracy. He must provide complete financial disclosure of all profits from illegal activities and surrender all assets obtained through criminal exploitation of Ada Rodriguez's property. My parents faced similar requirements with specific acknowledgments required for their participation in fraud, conspiracy, and financial manipulation. Patricia and Robert Rodriguez must acknowledge in writing that they participated in a criminal conspiracy to exploit their daughter's property, that they used her personal information for fraudulent financial transactions, and that they attempted to manipulate and intimidate her to prevent her from protecting herself legally. But beyond acknowledgement of past criminal behavior, the policy established strict requirements for any future family relationship. All future family gatherings, communications, and interactions must be pre-approved in writing by Ada Rodriguez's legal representatives and must be conducted in the presence of neutral third-party observers. The policy stated clearly. The neutral third-party requirement meant that any future family contact would need to include professional mediators, attorneys, or other qualified observers who could document any attempts at manipulation, harassment, or inappropriate behavior. Family members seeking contact with Ada Rodriguez must submit written requests at least 30 days in advance, explaining the purpose of the requested contact, providing guarantees for appropriate behavior, and agreeing to immediate termination of contact if any violation of these terms occurs. The policy also established financial guarantees that family members would need to provide before any future contact would be considered. Any family member seeking future relationship privileges must post a cash bond of $25,000 that will be forfeited if they engage in any form of harassment, manipulation, criminal activity, or boundary violation during or after family interactions. The cash bond requirement served multiple purposes. It would compensate me for any future exploitation or harassment. It would ensure that family members took the boundaries seriously, and it would prevent casual manipulation attempts by requiring significant financial commitment to any future relationship. But perhaps the most important section of the policy addressed the issue of extended family and social manipulation that my parents and Jake had been using to pressure me into compliance. Any family member who engages in reputation-damage social manipulation or third-party pressure campaigns against Ada Rodriguez will face immediate prosecution for harassment and defamation regardless of their previous compliance with this agreement. The policy included specific prohibitions against contacting my employers, professional colleagues, friends, or other family members to spread false information or manipulate my relationships. Family members are permanently prohibited from discussing their relationship disputes with Ada Rodriguez in any public forum, social media platform, or third-party communication. Violation of this confidentiality requirement will result in immediate legal action and permanent termination of all family relationship privileges. The document also established mandatory drug testing requirements for any family member seeking future contact given the extensive drug trafficking that had been conducted through Jake's criminal activities. Any family member seeking relationship privileges must submit to random drug testing and background checks to ensure they are not engaged in ongoing criminal activities that could expose Ada Rodriguez to legal liability. But the most comprehensive section of the policy addressed the fundamental change in how family relationships would be structured going forward. Ada Rodriguez reserves the right to terminate any family relationship immediately and without explanation if she determines that continued contact is not in her best interests. The policy stated, "Family members do not have any inherent right to her time, attention, resources, or emotional energy." This section represented a complete rejection of the family dynamics that had allowed my exploitation to continue for so long. Instead of assuming that family relationships should be maintained regardless of behavior, the policy established that family members would need to earn and maintain relationship privileges through appropriate behavior. Future family relationships will be based on mutual respect, legal compliance, and demonstrated value to Ada Rodriguez's well-being. Family members who cannot meet these standards will be permanently excluded from any future contact. The policy also included detailed procedures for enforcement, including automatic triggers for legal action if any terms were violated. Any violation of this agreement will result in immediate restraining order applications, additional criminal charges where applicable, and forfeiture of all financial bonds and relationship privileges. The enforcement section made it clear that I was no longer willing to give family members multiple chances to violate my boundaries or to negotiate reduced consequences for inappropriate behavior. This agreement represents the final opportunity for family members to demonstrate their commitment to legal and appropriate behavior. No future warnings, negotiations, or second chances will be provided for any violations. When I received calls from family members after they had received the family gathering policy, their reactions revealed everything I needed to know about their willingness to respect boundaries and change their behavior. Jake's response was predictable rage and rejection of any accountability. "This is insane, Ada. You can't treat family like a business contract. I'm not signing anything that admits I did something wrong, and I'm sure as hell not posting $25,000 to talk to my own sister." My parents' response was focused on negotiating reduced requirements rather than accepting accountability for their behavior. "Ada, these terms are unreasonable," my mother complained. "We understand that you're upset, but requiring lawyers and observers for family dinners is just ridiculous. Can't we find some middle ground that doesn't involve all this legal complexity?" "The legal complexity exists because you chose to engage in criminal behavior," I replied. "If you want simple family relationships, you should have thought about that before participating in fraud and conspiracy." "But Ada, we're your parents," my father added, as if biological relationship somehow exempted them from accountability. "Surely there's a way to work through this that doesn't require treating us like criminals." "Dad, you are criminals. You participated in a criminal conspiracy that caused me significant financial damage and legal liability. The family gathering policy simply acknowledges that reality and establishes protections to prevent future criminal activity." The phone calls confirmed that none of my family members were prepared to accept genuine accountability for their criminal behavior or to respect the boundaries necessary for any future relationship. More importantly, their responses demonstrated that they still viewed family relationships as something they were entitled to regardless of their behavior, rather than something they needed to earn through appropriate conduct. The family gathering policy had served its intended purpose. It had established clear, enforceable boundaries while revealing that my family remained unwilling to respect those boundaries or acknowledge their criminal behavior. Their rejection of accountability and continued attempts to manipulate me into accepting inappropriate behavior confirmed that I had made the right decision in implementing comprehensive legal protections. The family relationships I had been desperately trying to preserve were based on exploitation and manipulation rather than genuine love or respect. The family gathering policy had simply made that reality explicit and legally enforceable. Over the following 6 months, the consequences of my comprehensive legal action unfolded with a precision that even I hadn't fully anticipated. Each family member faced exactly the legal and financial reckoning that their criminal behavior had earned, and their responses to those consequences revealed their true character in ways that eliminated any remaining doubt about the wisdom of my decisions. Jake was the first to face serious legal consequences when federal agents arrested him at his apartment on multiple felony charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, blackmail, and conspiracy. The arrest was the result of a coordinated investigation involving the FBI, DEA, and local law enforcement agencies that had been building cases against him for months. "Your brother's blackmail operation was more extensive than we initially realized," Sarah informed me after speaking with the federal prosecutor handling Jake's case. "They've identified 17 different victims who made payments to him over the past year, including several prominent local officials and business leaders." The federal charges carried potential prison sentences of up to 20 years, and the prosecutor made it clear that Jake's systematic criminal behavior and his attempts to threaten and intimidate me had eliminated any possibility of a lenient plea agreement. Mr. Jake Rodriguez demonstrated a complete lack of remorse for his criminal behavior and actively attempted to obstruct justice by threatening witnesses, the prosecutor explained during our meeting. His case will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law. But Jake's criminal troubles extended far beyond the federal charges. Several of his blackmail victims had filed civil lawsuits seeking damages for emotional distress, reputation harm, and financial losses related to his extortion activities. The civil suits included demands for punitive damages that could potentially result in financial judgments exceeding $200,000. Your former brother is facing financial ruin even if he avoids prison time, my attorney explained. The combination of criminal restitution requirements and civil liability will likely result in permanent garnishment of any future income he might earn. Jake's response to his legal troubles was exactly what I had expected: continued attempts to blame me for the consequences of his own criminal behavior. From jail, he made multiple phone calls to relatives and former friends, attempting to generate sympathy and support by portraying himself as the victim of my vindictiveness. Jake keeps calling people saying that Ada destroyed his life over minor property damage. My cousin Michelle told me during a call where she apologized for initially believing his lies. But when I saw the news reports about his arrest for federal crimes, I realized he had been completely lying about what really happened. The public exposure of Jake's criminal activities had been devastating to his attempts to maintain his narrative about being unfairly persecuted. News reports about his arrest included detailed descriptions of his blackmail operations, drug trafficking facilitation, and systematic fraud, making it impossible for anyone to continue believing his version of events. My parents faced their own serious legal consequences, though their status as older first-time offenders and their cooperation with investigators resulted in somewhat more lenient treatment than Jake received. Patricia and Robert were charged with conspiracy and fraud in both federal and state courts, with potential sentences of up to 5 years in federal prison. More importantly, for their immediate circumstances, they faced civil liability for their participation in Jake's criminal enterprise that put their house and retirement savings at serious risk. Your parents used their home as collateral for some of the fraudulent financial transactions they conducted using your property, my attorney explained. If the civil judgments against them exceed their liquid assets, they could lose their house to satisfy the restitution requirements. The financial pressure on my parents was compounded by the legal fees they faced for defending against multiple criminal and civil cases. Their attempts to hire experienced criminal defense attorneys had already cost them over $40,000, and their cases were just beginning to work through the court system. But perhaps more devastating to my parents than the legal consequences were the social and community consequences that resulted from public exposure of their criminal behavior. Patricia had been forced to resign from her position on the church board when news of her fraud charges became public. Robert had lost his part-time consulting contracts when his business associates learned about his legal troubles. The community where they've lived for 30 years now knows that they participated in criminal activities to exploit their own daughter, Sarah informed me. Their reputation and social standing have been completely destroyed. The extended family consequences were also significant, as relatives who had initially supported my parents' manipulation campaign learned the truth about their criminal behavior and began distancing themselves to avoid association with the scandal. Most of your aunts, uncles, and cousins have stopped speaking to your parents, Michelle reported. Everyone is embarrassed about being manipulated into supporting criminals, and nobody wants to be associated with what they did to you. But the most satisfying consequence of my legal action was watching the systematic collapse of my family's attempts to continue their manipulation and harassment campaigns. Every attempt they made to pressure me or damage my reputation resulted in additional criminal charges that made their legal situations worse. When Jake attempted to have friends contact my employer with false accusations, those contacts were documented as witness intimidation and added to his federal charges. When my parents tried to continue their social media campaign against me, those activities were identified as harassment and resulted in additional civil liability. Your family's attempts to retaliate against you for protecting yourself legally have actually strengthened your position in all the criminal and civil cases, my attorney explained. Every time they try to manipulate or intimidate you, they provide additional evidence of their criminal mindset and their lack of genuine remorse. The legal system had proven to be remarkably effective at protecting me from ongoing family exploitation once I had committed to using it properly. Instead of trying to resolve criminal behavior through family discussions and emotional appeals, I had used law enforcement agencies and courts to establish clear consequences for inappropriate behavior. 6 months after implementing my legal strategy, I had achieved complete protection from my family's criminal activities, full compensation for the damages they had caused, and comprehensive legal barriers that prevented any future exploitation or harassment. More importantly, I had learned that the family relationships I had been desperately trying to preserve had never actually existed. The parents and brother I had loved and supported for years had been systematically exploiting my success while manipulating me into believing that I was obligated to accept unlimited abuse in the name of family loyalty. The legal action had simply revealed the truth about relationships that had always been based on exploitation, rather than genuine care or respect. As I watched my family face the consequences of their criminal behavior, I felt a sense of justice and closure that no amount of family therapy or emotional reconciliation could have provided. They had chosen to exploit me systematically while portraying me as the problem for objecting to their criminal activities. Now they were experiencing exactly the legal and social consequences that their behavior had earned, and I was finally free from their manipulation and exploitation. The scared, guilty daughter who had been desperately seeking family approval was gone, replaced by a confident woman who understood her worth and refused to accept inappropriate treatment from anyone regardless of their biological relationship to her. The reckoning was complete, and justice had been served exactly as it should be through legal consequences for criminal behavior rather than through emotional manipulation and family pressure. 18 months after discovering the destruction at my Lake Tahoe vacation home, I stood on the newly renovated deck watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and orange, and marveled at how completely my life had been transformed by the decision to protect myself from family exploitation. The house had been restored to a beauty that exceeded even its original condition, with professional security systems, upgraded appliances, and carefully selected furnishings that reflected my personal taste rather than anyone else's expectations. More importantly, it had become a true sanctuary, again, a place where I could find peace and restoration without worrying about violation or exploitation. The legal consequences for my family had been finalized several months earlier with outcomes that reflected the severity of their criminal behavior, while providing me with complete protection from any future harassment or manipulation. Jake had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple felony charges, including wire fraud money, laundering, blackmail, and conspiracy. The federal judge had been particularly harsh in sentencing because of Jake's complete lack of remorse and his continued attempts to threaten and intimidate me even after his arrest. Mr. Rodriguez showed a pattern of criminal behavior that was both sophisticated and predatory, the judge had explained during sentencing. His exploitation of family relationships to facilitate criminal activities demonstrates a fundamental lack of character that requires significant incarceration to protect the community. The civil judgments against Jake exceeded $300,000, ensuring that any future income he might earn would be garnished to compensate me and his other victims for decades to come. More satisfying than the financial judgments was the knowledge that Jake would spend his most productive adult years in federal prison, facing daily reminders of the consequences of exploiting other people. My parents had received more lenient criminal sentences due to their ages and their cooperation with investigators, but the legal and financial consequences had still been devastating to their previous lifestyle and social standing. Patricia received 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Robert received 2 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. The civil judgments against my parents had forced them to sell their house and liquidate their retirement savings to pay restitution and legal fees. They were now living in a small rental apartment and working part-time jobs to survive financially, facing the reality that their criminal behavior had destroyed the comfortable retirement they had been planning. But perhaps more importantly, the legal action had completely eliminated my family's ability to continue their manipulation and harassment. The comprehensive restraining orders, criminal probation requirements, and civil judgments had created legal barriers that made any future exploitation impossible. Your family learned that there are serious consequences for criminal behavior, my attorney had summarized during our final meeting. More importantly, they learned that you are not someone who can be exploited with impunity. The extended family relationships that my parents had attempted to destroy through their manipulation campaign had actually been strengthened by the truth about their criminal behavior. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends who had initially been manipulated into supporting my parents' narrative had reached out to apologize and rebuild relationships once they understood what had really happened. "We're so sorry that we believed their lies about you," my cousin Michelle had said during a heartfelt conversation. "When we saw the news reports about their criminal charges and learned what they had really been doing to you, we realized how completely they had manipulated all of us." The professional relationships that my parents had attempted to damage through their workplace harassment had also recovered completely. My colleagues and supervisors had been impressed by my professional handling of a family crisis and my commitment to legal accountability rather than emotional manipulation. "You handled an incredibly difficult situation with remarkable maturity and strength," my boss Jennifer had told me during my annual review. "Your ability to protect yourself legally while maintaining your professional responsibilities shows exactly the kind of character and judgment we value in our leadership team." But the most important transformation had been internal. The scared, guilty daughter who had been desperately trying to preserve family relationships at any cost was gone, replaced by a confident woman who understood her worth and refused to accept inappropriate treatment from anyone. I had learned to recognize manipulation tactics immediately and to respond with clear boundaries rather than emotional accommodation. I had discovered that genuine family relationships required mutual respect and accountability, not unlimited tolerance for exploitative behavior. Most importantly, I had learned that protecting myself from criminal exploitation wasn't selfish or vindictive. It was necessary for maintaining healthy relationships and personal integrity. The vacation home that had once been a source of stress and violation had become a symbol of my growth and transformation. Every carefully chosen detail reflected my personal taste and values. Every security system and legal protection represented my commitment to protecting myself from future exploitation. As I prepared dinner in my restored kitchen that evening, I reflected on the life lesson that had emerged from this painful but transformative experience. True family relationships are based on mutual respect, genuine care, and shared values, not biological connection or emotional manipulation. People who truly love you will respect your boundaries, celebrate your success, and support your well-being. People who exploit your love for their own benefit while resenting your attempts to protect yourself are not family in any meaningful sense, regardless of their biological relationship to you. I had learned to value people who appreciated me rather than those who took advantage of me. I had discovered that saying no to exploitation wasn't selfish. It was necessary for maintaining healthy relationships with people who actually deserved my time and energy. The painful process of holding my family accountable for their criminal behavior had taught me that genuine love requires accountability, not enabling. Protecting people from the consequences of their bad choices isn't kindness. It's a form of harm that prevents them from learning and growing. As I settled into my comfortable living room that night, surrounded by belongings that reflected my personal taste and values, I felt a sense of peace and satisfaction that I had never experienced during the years when I had been constantly worried about managing family drama and absorbing the consequences of other people's poor decisions. My life was now filled with people who respected my boundaries, appreciated my success, and contributed positively to my well-being. The toxic family dynamics that had consumed so much of my emotional energy had been replaced by healthy relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. The scared young woman who had been desperate for family approval had been replaced by a confident adult who understood that her worth didn't depend on other people's opinions or acceptance. I had learned one of life's most important lessons: you cannot love people into treating you with respect, but you can protect yourself from those who choose not to respect you. And sometimes protecting yourself from family exploitation is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved, because it creates opportunities for everyone to grow into healthier, more authentic relationships. As I prepared for bed that night in my beautiful, secure vacation home, I smiled thinking about how much my life had improved since I had stopped accepting inappropriate treatment in the name of family loyalty and started protecting myself with the same energy I had once devoted to managing other people's poor choices. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been absolutely worth it. I was finally living the life I deserved, surrounded by people who truly valued me in spaces that reflected my authentic self, and with the knowledge that I had the strength and wisdom to protect myself from anyone who might try to exploit my kindness in the future. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where family members or close friends took advantage of your generosity or success? How did you handle it, and what did you learn about setting boundaries with people you love? Share your story in the comments below, because your experience might help someone else who's struggling with similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it when they're dealing with family exploitation or boundary issues. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories about overcoming difficult family situations and building healthy relationships based on mutual respect. Finally, please share this story with anyone who might be struggling with family members who don't respect their boundaries or who take advantage of their success. Sometimes we all need reminders that protecting ourselves from exploitation isn't selfish. It's necessary for our well-being and for building genuinely healthy relationships. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you deserve relationships based on respect, not exploitation. Never let anyone convince you that family loyalty requires accepting inappropriate treatment. True love includes accountability, and protecting yourself from criminal behavior isn't vindictive, it's wisdom.